guys, welcome to another episode of Game Changer Podcast. I'm David Villa here. I'm also solo again today. My wife is not in studio, so I'm going to talk to you guys for a few minutes about operating out of the favor of God. Operating out of the favor of God. So I'm going to break down God's favor today, and I'm going to help us with our businesses, our leadership, and our lives as parents, as students, whatever it is that you do. I believe that you can operate out of God's favor. So I'm going to look at the life of Joseph for a second. The testimony of Joseph is one of the most exciting and tragic accounts of a child of God who has to learn how to outwork their ministry calling in the context of the marketplace. And those of you that have listened to this podcast, or if you listen to GC Talks, or if you followed what I do, you know that God's given me a heart for the marketplace, right? I believe that the marketplace is the next place for God's move, and his revival is taking shape in the marketplace all around us. And so when we look at Joseph in so many ways is a poster child for the foundational principle of operating out of the favor of God. So he was somehow able to stay close to God, even in the midst of his many trials. And, I often look at Joseph's life and I kind of question and put myself in his shoes sometimes. And, we go through things today. Obviously, what Joseph went through physically, we don't experience those things physically in our lives, but we go through different types of trials and different types of challenges. And I often looked at the life of Joseph and I can put myself in his shoes and say, would I remain faithful in these trials? And so Joseph's prophetic dreams that he had experienced were there all the while he was part of the catalyst for his sufferings. And so these dreams were part of the catalyst for his sufferings. And they were also a powerful tool that kept Joseph focused on God's call upon his life. He showed integrity. He showed holiness by the way he served people that God placed in front of him, regardless of where he was, whether he was in the pit, whether he was in Potiphar's house where he served Potiphar, whether he was in the prison where he served the jailer and the people that ran the prison, Joseph rose to the top there, or whether he was in the palace in second command of all of Egypt. So he showed integrity and holiness by the way that he served people that God placed in front of him. So he operated in prophetic capacity as he held himself to an exemplary standard in his marketplace assignment, right? God's given you and I a marketplace assignment. You are placed in the marketplace for such a time as this, to be an example of God, to be a voice of God, to be an encouragement to those around you. So all of this culminated in Potiphar's house as the favor of God undergirded Joseph's life to a degree that even a non-believer, Potiphar, a non-believer in God, right, testified that the God of Joseph must be with Joseph. Potiphar said that. He said, the God of Joseph must be with this young man. So I believe that the favor of God, you can operate in such a way out of the favor of God that even the ear of secular leaders and secular influencers can be bent towards you, and they can recognize, not even knowing the God you serve, but they can recognize that the God you serve must be with you. So we look at the assignment of Joseph. The assignment of God's favor in Joseph's life was evident. And I believe the assignment of God's favor in our lives is there to cause the purposes of God, his very purpose, to triumph in our world. And so I say it this way: God's favor can never be owned by an individual, because the purpose of God's favor is to cause the will of God to come to pass in our lives. I want to break that down and say it again. God's favor cannot be owned by anyone. So you can't own God's favor. God's favor is his approval or his support. He undergirds, he supports you because what you're doing is lined up with his purpose. He approves our lives and what we do when our lives and our purposes line up together with his will. So his favor cannot be owned by us, because his favor is there and is designed to cause his will to come to pass in our lives. So as we walk in ever increasing intimacy with God, discovering and aligning to his assignment upon our lives, we learn how to represent God accurately in the spheres that he puts us in, and we become attuned to his voice. So there's been times where I've walked not out of the favor of God. And, I think back to those times, and, it's almost like the station was just, you ever had a radio station back in the old days when you had to turn the dial, and in between the dial, there was that fuzz. There was that static. It just wasn't quite tuned. You can hear it, but then if you just turned it a little bit more, one side or the other, it becomes tuned and it sounds clear. If you listen to someone sing out of tune, it can be discerned very quickly. So I believe that God's favor is there helping us discover and align to his assignment on our lives. And we learn how to represent him in the sphere of influence that he's placed us in. And we become attuned to his voice. We're connected to the voice of God. We can then have great confidence that the favor of God will meet us in such a way that his will is fully accomplished through us. That's the sweet spot. That's the place where you don't have to strive. That's the place where you don't have to grind. The phrase rise and grind. I get that phrase. I've written a Bible plan called Arise and Shine versus Rise and Grind, because when I've risen and grinded in the days past, I get it, right? It's a form of, maybe we look at it as a form of working hard or going after it. But the very definition of grinding is to smash something into small particles or to smash it into bits and pieces. Well, the Bible says that we are pressed, but we're not crushed. We're not crushed, so we don't grind. And there's a difference in grinding and shining. And I believe that God's favor, if we operate out of his favor, then we're in a place where we can be attuned to his voice and we can have great confidence that the favor of God will meet us in such a way that his will fully be accomplished through us. And I can say this is much better, right, than the opposite way. This is much better than the hustle and grind that most people tend to give themselves when they're trying to get ahead in the marketplace. We've all been there, right? I'm not saying Christians shouldn't work hard and be diligent, right? The Bible says if you don't work, you don't eat. The Bible says don't be like the sluggard, be like the ant, right? The Bible teaches work ethic. And from the very beginning, God created the man and woman in the Garden of Eden, and he created them to work in the garden. So just because they had the perfect environment and atmosphere around them where there was nothing but the presence of God, there was also work to be done. So I'm not saying Christians shouldn't work and be diligent. We should. We must. But there's a difference between hard work and toil, right? To toil is to operate out of the limitation of the sweat of your own energy and with the parameters of your own strength. I don't know about you, but I've tried that. And still to this day, I'm 51, I'll be 52 years old this June. And even to this day, sometimes I rely on my own limitation of sweat, my own energy within the parameters of my own strength, even to this day. And when I do those things, I stop operating out of God's favor and I begin to operate out of my own resources. And how many know that if you operate out of your own resources, that's the quickest way to an empty tank that there is? The Apostle Paul was no slouch when it came to working either, and he understood the X factor in his life was not his own strength, but the grace and supernatural of God, favor of God in his life. Paul said his grace is sufficient because the Holy Spirit spoke to him when Paul said, can you just remove this thing? Can you remove this stumbling block? And then the Holy Spirit spoke to him and said, my grace is sufficient. When we operate out of God's favor, there's an ease that comes on us. There's an ease that comes along with the hard work because you're not left to your own end result. You're left to the promises and favor of God on your life. Can you think about a time when the favor of God intervened in your life to such a degree that you realized it wasn't you just working in your own strength, but it was God undergirding you? I can think about those times, right? That's the sweet spot. That's where we want to be. That's not magic. It's not something that we have to just wonder when it's going to happen. I believe that we can walk a life like Joseph, that wherever we are and whatever the circumstances are that we face, that we can walk and operate out of God's favor. When Joseph went to Potiphar's house, he recognized that the Spirit of God was on Joseph, and he promoted Joseph to run his whole house. When Joseph was placed in the prison for a crime that he did not commit, instead of becoming bitter and instead of trying to figure out a way in his own self to get out of it, And he may have tried that as well. It doesn't record that in the Bible, but Joseph eventually settled in and honored God even in the prison. And before long, he was promoted to running the prison. Why? Because he operated out of the favor of God. Here's what operating out of the favor of God will do for you, regardless of the place you find yourself in. When it comes time for the promotion, when it comes time for God to promote you into your purpose, when you're operating out of his favor, that's the time, that's the place where God will promote you. And so Joseph was operating out of his favor at Potiphar's house, and he was placed in the prison. He operated out of the favor of God in the prison, and then he was promoted subsequently to second in command in all of Egypt. And then he began to see the purpose of God unfold. But he didn't wait until he got to that position to operate in God's favor. He operated the entire time out of God's favor. Listen, I believe that you and I can mix up toil and hard work. We can operate out of the sweat of our own brow and the limited energy that you and I have. And I'm going to tell you, that's a recipe for being tired and frustrated. There's a difference in being tired and frustrated at the end of a day or the end of a week or the end of a month or the end of a year. And there's a difference between being tired and accomplished. I want to be tired and accomplished. Listen, it's okay to lay your head down at night and be tired and get a good night's sleep, because you can look back at a day hard worked in operating out of God's favor versus operating in your own limitations and leaving and going home tired, but yet frustrated. I'm going to give you one analogy as I wrap this up. I'm thinking of a mouse or a hamster inside of an aquarium, and they're on a hamster wheel. They're running 1,000 miles an hour. They're going after it with everything they have. They're exhausting energy, and they have this cheese that you can place on the outside of the aquarium where they can see the cheese, but they can't get to the cheese. So they get on the hamster wheel and they just run over and over and over in circles, exhausting themselves in their own sweat, their own limitations, and their own toil, and they never can get that prize cheese. Take that same hamster and put him in a maze, and you put the cheese at the end of the maze. And even though it's challenging, even though you might get tired, even though it's work, that hamster can find its way through the maze, operating, guys, out of the favor of God, and reach the destination that's set before us. Amen? So listen, today, I want to challenge us as we wrap this up. Operate out of the favor of God. Operate out of his approval. Operate out of his support. Let God undergird what you do and watch what happens. This is how we receive the fruit. This is how we receive the accomplishment. This is how we walk out the purpose that God's placed in our lives for each and every one of us. I hope this helped you today, operating out of the favor of God. Listen, if you love this podcast and you want more of it, make sure you subscribe, click the little notification bell at the end so that you can find out when new episodes drop. And listen, if you're on Spotify and Apple, I appreciate you guys. If you will subscribe, if you're not on Spotify and Apple, you can be in tune of every episode that drops on a weekly basis of GC Talks and Game Changer Podcasts. Also, if you want to connect with us in the marketplace, we have resources available. We just surpassed 17,000 downloads of our app. You can find this on any place apps are located, and you can search Game Changer by IPD Agency. Make sure you download the app. If you're on social media, you can follow us on Instagram. If you post, make sure you tag us. We'd love to see what God is doing in your life. Listen, guys, let's operate out of God's favor, not out of our own limitations. I hope you guys have a great day. I'll see you next time on Game Changer Podcast.